Welcome. You're listening to Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show where we unlock the church's ancient battle cry of divine filiation and embrace the gentle kingship of Christ through the riches of the Christian tradition. Happy Tuesday. Let's begin. Okay, welcome back to another episode of Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. Here, as always, with Pat and Lewis.
Hey.
How we doing? Awesome. So, we're continuing our discussion of verse 5 here. Pat?
Then he shall speak to them in his anger and trouble them in his rage.
Great. So we've been focusing a lot on the kind of the first half of the verse in the previous two episodes. I'd love to kind of dive into the second half. Pat, would you, from a Latin scholar perspective, just tell us a little bit more about the words that are being used here?
Well, that's a good question. Conturbabit, I guess, is a central word in this half of the verse that's translated as trouble them. It means to take a crowd and mix it all together. We, of course, English disturb or perturb.
Or turbulence.
All of these come from this central root. And so the question is, what is it? It's left unsaid by the psalm what this disturbance is. What does it mean that the Lord will trouble them or disturb them? And so I think it's helpful to think about it in two categories. One is temporary disturbance, and then maybe the way we can tackle the next episode is eternal disturbance, which is the way that Aquinas treats as having an eternal effect. So we can cover that in the next episode. But in this episode, maybe we can talk about the temporary disturbance brought about by God's intervention into the life of the sinner. When a person is committing sin and is unrepentant or continuing to remain in sin, which is kind of who this verse is talking about, what are the effects of that? How does God's love express itself in that situation? Well, it's often through disturbance, right? Through this kind of confusion. We see this, for example, in the Tower of Babel, that these people have kind of relied on themselves and made themselves out to be God. And for that unrepentant sin, they're disturbed, they're confused, they're troubled. And so they can no longer coordinate together. And so that's kind of an example of the disturbance that's brought about because of our sin.
There's a lot of, I think, kind of, sort of personal, spiritual relevance to that. If we're really clear on our vocation, on our mission, our purpose, our, apostolic mission, I guess I would say, clarity leads to a lot of right action. But then if we have fallen into sin and kind of continue to kind of proceed in choices that are not good for us, we do start to get really confused and messed up. And so I just want to kind of highlight that aspect, right, as we kind of pray personally about this. So then what happens when God does do this intervention?
Yeah, I think the experience alone of the disturbance can be how he acts in us, that our realization of, wow, things have gone upside down is a way that we are called to, that we're not on the right path. So, for example, when Jesus overturns the tables of the money changers, this is a real act of disturbance that he performs in his rage, again, about what they're doing in his Father's house. And so that act alone of being disturbed, it's not like I don't know, the Bible doesn't say if he helps them set them back up or hide some tables and say, okay, now take the money out of here. It's their experience of, okay, I've got my priorities all mixed up and now everything's overturned. Well, how do I put this back together in a way that's actually in alignment with what should be the case? It's kind of an invitation to realign our lives. Is this disturbance brings about the knowledge that, okay, something is not in order. And so how do we bring it back into order? It's with his help. It can be how it's expressed.
Yeah, and I think for us, it can be, again, it's jarring to read the story of Christ express anger where he does so many disturbing things. He literally flips a table, makes whips. I mean, we're like, he's disturbing the peace here. That's what it would look like to us. But as we said earlier, his anger, the anger of God is always in perfect rationality and perfect proportion. So that shows kind of like when we talked about in last episode, where it's the gradation of the anger expressed in scripture can be kind of proportional to the seriousness of the transgression in order to kind of raise the awareness of how serious it is. That's why he feels totally justified to flip over tables, whip things. And we're like, oh, that's a lot of, but he's like, no, do you understand how serious this is? Do you understand the seriousness of it? I have to up the disturbance here. Because he verbally rebukes them at various points. He doesn't necessarily flip over their carts or whatever that they're driving usually. Yeah. But in this situation, because of the holiness of the temple and the seriousness, I have to disturb this significantly. This has to be completely everything about this has to be totally flipped. And we even see later on, right, in the history of the temple is completely destroyed. I mean, so that's what he even did in terms of flipping over the tables is minimal compared to what we see later. What he says, this whole temple will be destroyed, and it is destroyed, right? And so even that, I think, is image for this disturbance, this physical disturbance we see. I also want to talk a little bit about disturbance internally. You said earlier, like that, even the internal disturbance that the person within the wrath or experiencing the wrath of God experiences is kind of a part of the call back to conversion. In Deuteronomy 28, the second half of that chapter is about the curses for disobedience that come about. This is like a really powerful. If you want to talk to your kids about how they should obey you, read this for enough. But it says what will happen if you don't obey God's will, right? The very beginning is what is the blessings for obedience, but right after that are the curses for disobedience. And it's so psychological. I mean, the things that are said there about, there's a lot of physical things in terms of like, you'll be defeated by your enemies. You'll be the tail, not the head. I mean, all of those types of things. But it also says things like this: the Lord will send on you curses, confusion, rebuke, and everything you put your hand to, right? It's like this, it's a sense of like, just a weight will be on my shoulders because of my sin. The darkness will kind of surround me. It'll kind of be like this cloud over my head. All these curses shall come upon you. They'll pursue and overtake you because you now obey the Lord your God. And it's just like, I would just invite you to turn to that verse 2 to pray on this idea of like the kind of what a manifestation of what the internal disturbance can feel like and look like, and be separated from God, being a kind back conversion.
Yeah, I think there's some other verses from that chapter that you pointed out before, such as, and I think it's worth reading them. They're so powerful. This is starting at verse 65 in Deuteronomy 28. There the Lord will give you an anxious mind, eyes weary with longing, and a despairing heart. You will live in constant suspense, filled with dread both night and day, never sure of your life. In the morning you will say, if only it were evening, and in the evening, if only it were morning, because of the terror that will fill your hearts and the sights that your eyes will see. And I think that's just so powerful, as punishment is not, the punishment for disobedience is living in a state of dread and disturbance and anxiety. And that is such a powerful, I like it's the psychological way of reading it, because it makes it so clear that it's your own choices that prize that it's the same God's love is upon you, and it's your rebellion against your own nature that's brought about what you experience as fear and anxiety and disturbance. I think it's Hilary of Poitiers talks about how the punishment, what seems to be a punishment, or I guess what he says is that the punishment of the one enduring the punishment seems like the anger of the person who decreed it. That we attribute our experience of punishment as somehow belonging to the anger of the person who's put it upon us. But that's actually just a perspective issue, that we always assume that, okay, it must be the fault of the person who established this law that I'm now feeling this penalty. And that's not actually the case, right? Obviously, the reason you're experiencing the penalty is because you've disobeyed, because you've broken the law. And the law, in this case, is our own nature, is our own identity, and that's what we've rebelled against. And so it's not the anger, it's the penalty of disobedience to our own nature that God has given to us as a gift, that's really what the experience of anger and the disturbance that results from it really come from.
And how much more then do we want to pray with David? Like, give me back the joy of my salvation, your salvation, right? Because that joy, that lightness of spirit, and all that anxiousness and despair and the crippling mindset that just melts away in that joy, right? You're talking about the Christological approach here to the psalm, and Jesus, upending the quote unquote status quo of the temple, and his words there: "You have taken what should have been a house of prayer and turned it into a den of thieves." And how often do we do this in our own lives, taking what, this should be an act of prayer, right? St. Paul says, pray always, right? Whether you're eating or drinking, right? And St. Josemaria would say in your work, right? You've taken what should be an act of prayer and you've turned it into the same den of thieves. And so then Christ intervenes, right? Christ intervenes. God always intervenes in this, right? To kind of disturb that where you're headed.
Yeah, I was just going to say that reading this Christologically, it as kind of a prophecy of what's going to happen with Jesus' death and resurrection, which is classically how this psalm has been read as referring mostly to the Jewish leaders who rebelled against the Christ, right, by putting him to death. And this verse 5 reminds me of one of the earlier verses of the Psalm, where it's the people meditate on vain things. And that the fruit of meditating on vain things, of course, is going to be confusion, because you're thinking about not what's true, but you have your own empty plots that you've tried to pursue. And of course, since they're not aligned towards reality, they're going to be upended because they're fruitless. They're empty. They're vain things. And so that's the case for the Jewish leaders who try to put Jesus to death. And of course, how does he disturb that attempt? Oh, he came back from the dead, right? So what we attempt to do, God will work good out of it, but our own empty plots towards destruction will always come to naught because they're vain, empty things. And so we shouldn't be surprised that they result in our disturbance later on.
Well, in a sense, and I know we have to wrap this episode up here, but in a sense, we could look at the incarnation, right, and the Trinity together, deciding that the second person, would come, would kind of be inserting into history as a man. This is a huge sort of disturbance, so to speak, but in a good way, and we can apply that to all of the intervention of God. All right, till next time here on Sons and Kings.
Why this tumult among nations, among peoples this useless murmuring? They arise, the kings of the earth. Princes plot against the Lord and his anointed. Come, let us break their fetters. Come, let us cast off their yoke. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord is laughing them to scorn. Then he will speak in his anger. His rage will strike them with terror. It is I who have set up my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will announce the decree of the Lord said to me, you are my son. It is I who have begotten you this day. Ask, and I shall bequeath to you the nations. Put the ends of the earth in your possession. With a rod of iron you will break them, shatter them like a potter's jar. Now, O kings, understand. Take warning, rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with awe and trembling. Pay him your homage, lest he be angry and you perish. For suddenly his anger will blaze. Blessed are they who put their trust in God.
Hey, this is Jake. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. We're really glad that you joined us today. We hope you got something out of it. And if you did, I'd love to invite you to share with a friend, or even just like or subscribe to the platform. It really helps us to get the message out to more people, help more people with the show. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next episode.